They were about to take the children away, all 5 of them, to 5 different places. The youngest hadn't spoken in almost a year. The oldest was bleeding, standing in front of his brothers and sisters like a shield. And the man with the clipboard was already making the calls. That night, in a freezing Chicago alley, 5 poor siblings were minutes away from losing each other forever. But then a black SUV pulled up, and the rich man who stepped out changed the course of all their lives. If stories about family, sacrifice, and second chances touch your heart, subscribe and stay with me, because this one will stay with you for a long time. It was past midnight in Chicago's meatpacking district. The temperature had dropped below 20 degrees, and the wind moved through the narrow service alley like a knife. 5 children stood pressed against a cold brick wall. The oldest was 14. His name was Emmer. Blood ran down from a cut above his left eye, warm against the freezing air. He didn't wipe it. Both his hands were busy. One gripped his 11-year-old sister Save's wrist. The other held his 9-year-old brother Prosper by the collar, keeping him close. Behind them stood Sable, 6 years old, clutching a worn stuffed rabbit with one eye missing. She whispered softly to it, the way some children pray. And tucked into the smallest space near a rusted dumpster was Wren, 4 years old, barefoot, silent. He hadn't spoken a word since the night their mother left for a late shift at a gas station, and never came back. At the mouth of the alley stood a heavy man with a clipboard and a phone pressed to his ear. "The 2 younger ones go upstate," he said casually. "The girl and the quiet one. The middle boy, I've got a family that'll take him for the subsidy. The older 2, split them wherever there's space." Emma heard every word. 3 years in the system had taught him something important. Promises meant nothing. "We don't split," Emmer said, stepping forward. The man lowered the phone slowly and looked him over the way a buyer looks at damaged goods. "You don't get to decide that, kid." "We don't split," Emmer repeated. His hands were shaking. His face was bleeding. But his voice didn't move. Behind him, Save rested her hand on Prosper's shoulder. She wasn't crying. She hadn't cried in months. Some children run out of tears long before they run out of pain. Prosper stared at the ground, breathing fast, his stutter trapped in his throat. Please," he whispered. The man ignored him. Then Wren's eyes shifted toward the far end of the alley. Headlights appeared. A black SUV rolled slowly into the service road and stopped. The engine hummed. The windows were dark. Even the man with the clipboard stepped back. The rear door opened. The man who stepped out didn't look like anyone who belonged in that alley. He wore a charcoal overcoat, perfectly fitted. His shoes were polished. His movements were calm, controlled, expensive. His name was Calder Thane. In Chicago, Calder was known as a man who built things, companies, deals, power. A wealthy businessman. A quiet force. The kind of rich man people didn't question. He hadn't come looking for children. He had been leaving a nearby meeting when he heard a voice echo down the alley. "We don't split." Something about the way it was said had stopped him. Now he stood there, silent, studying the scene. 5 poor children. One bleeding. One barefoot. One shaking. One whispering to a toy. One standing like a soldier between them and the world. And the man with the clipboard. Calder didn't raise his voice. "How much?" he asked. The man blinked. "What?" "The value of this transaction." The color drained from the man's face. Calder stepped closer. "I know what you do. I know the facilities you use. I know the people who sign your approvals. And I know exactly who to call if you want your career to end tonight." The wind blew through the alley. For the first time, the man looked nervous. "These kids belong to the state," he muttered. Calder's voice was calm. No, they don't. There was a long pause. Then the man did the math, the kind of math people like him always did. Risk versus profit. Without another word, he turned and walked away. Just like that. The alley fell quiet. 5 children. 1 rich stranger. Calder didn't approach them. He didn't crouch or smile or pretend to be gentle. He simply said, "All of you, come with me." Emmer stepped forward immediately, placing himself between Calder and the others. "Who are you?" he demanded. "Someone who isn't going to separate you." "Everyone says that." "I know." The wind moved between them. Sable whispered to her rabbit. Prosper trembled. Emmer swallowed. "We don't split." Calder looked him straight in the eyes. "You won't." Emmer turned back. Save met his gaze. There were no good options left in the world they knew. Only different kinds of danger. Slowly, Emmer reached for Prosper's hand. Save took Sable's. Sable reached back for Wren. 5 siblings, forming their chain. Together, they walked out of the alley. They climbed into a vehicle that smelled like leather and warmth and a life none of them had ever known. Emmer sat closest to the door, his hand already on the handle. Ready to run. The SUV pulled away. And none of them knew yet that they were being driven toward a home worth millions of dollars. A place filled with silence. A place built for one man. And a place that was about to change all of them, including him. Because as Calder watched the city lights pass through the window, something stirred in his chest. A memory of another night, long ago, when he had been the oldest one too, and someone had taken his family away. The car turned onto Lake Shore Drive, and inside it, 5 children held hands, as the doors of a completely different world slowly opened. The building stood tall and silent against the dark water of Lake Michigan, its windows glowing like quiet stars. The SUV disappeared into a private underground entrance, and the doors closed behind them with a heavy final sound that made Prosper flinch. The elevator ride was long. No one spoke. Emmer stood closest to the door again, one arm stretched slightly behind him so his fingers could still touch Save's sleeve. He counted the floors without meaning to. Counting helped. Counting meant control. When the elevator opened, the space beyond it didn't look real. The floor was smooth marble. The lights were soft and warm. The air smelled clean, not like shelters, not like old carpet or bleach or crowded rooms. It smelled like nothing, which somehow felt stranger than anything else. They stepped out together, still holding on to one another. Calder walked ahead without looking back. He didn't rush them. He didn't speak. He simply moved through the space like a man who expected the world to make room for him. At the end of the hall, a woman was waiting. She was in her 50s, tall, with calm eyes and practical hands. She looked at Calder first, then at the children. Her expression didn't soften. It didn't harden either. She just assessed. "These are the children?" she asked quietly. "Yes." A short pause. "All 5?" "Yes." Another pause. The kind where a person does quick math in their head. Beds, clothes, food, logistics, problems. Then she nodded once. "I'll prepare the 3rd floor." She turned and walked away immediately, already planning, already moving with purpose. The children stood frozen near the entrance. The space around them was enormous. Wide windows, high ceilings, furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum instead of a home. Prosper wrapped his arms around himself. Are we allowed to touch things?" he whispered. No one answered. Save moved slowly through the room, her eyes scanning corners, hallways, exits. She wasn't looking at the beauty. She was mapping the space. Always mapping. Sable stayed close to her, whispering softly into her rabbit. It's a big house, Mr. Peton. Big houses can be okay. Remember the one with the lady who had cookies? Maybe this one has cookies too. Her voice didn't sound convinced. Ren stood near the doorway, staring down at the marble floor beneath his bare feet, his small body perfectly still. Emmer didn't move at all. He stayed exactly where he had stopped, one hand resting lightly against the wall near the entrance. Positioned for escape. Calder noticed. He didn't say anything. After a few minutes, the woman returned. "The room is ready," she said. "All of you. This way." They followed her up a wide staircase, their footsteps small against the quiet house. The bedroom was bigger than any space they had ever slept in. One large bed. 2 extra mattresses placed neatly on the floor. Clean blankets. Soft pillows. A small nightlight glowing near the wall. Save noticed the nightlight first. Her shoulders dropped just a little. "All 5 stay here," the woman said. "Bathroom is through that door. It locks." She looked directly at Save when she said it. Then she hesitated. "There will be food in the kitchen later," she added. "In case anyone gets hungry." She left without waiting for a response. The door closed. For a moment, none of them moved. Then Emmer went to work. He checked the window. Locked. He opened the closet. Empty except for blankets. He walked into the bathroom. Tested the lock. He looked under the bed. Every movement was careful. Fast. Efficient. Only when he finished did the chain finally loosen. Save sat down first, pulling Sable into her lap. Sable buried her face in her shoulder and went quiet. Prosper lowered himself onto one of the mattresses and pulled his knees to his chest, rocking gently. Ren remained standing in the middle of the room. Not moving. Just looking. Emmer took his place by the door. Standing guard. Hours passed. The house stayed quiet. Sometime after midnight, footsteps moved softly down the hallway. It was Save. She walked slowly down the stairs, each step careful, listening for sounds. The kitchen lights were dim. On the counter sat a plate covered with wax paper. She lifted it. 4 sandwiches. Her hands moved quickly, almost automatically. She wrapped 2 tighter and slipped them into the pockets of her oversized jacket. Then she reached for another. "You can take all of them." She froze. Calder stood in the doorway. He wasn't angry. He wasn't smiling. He was just watching. I was going to put them back," she whispered quickly. "I just—" "Take them," he said calmly. "There's more in the refrigerator. Anything in the kitchen is yours. Any time." She stared at him. Adults didn't talk like that. There was always a limit. A rule. A condition. But his voice didn't change. No kindness. No warning. Just certainty. She slowly picked up the remaining sandwiches and held them close to her chest. "Thank you," she whispered. She hurried upstairs. Calder stayed there for a long moment after she left, staring at the empty kitchen. The next morning came quietly. New clothes were laid neatly in the hallway. Shoes, socks, shirts, pants, all sorted by size. Emmer opened the door just enough to pull everything inside. He dressed the younger ones himself. When he reached Ren, he knelt carefully and placed the small sneakers on his feet, tying the laces tight. Double knots. Always double knots. Breakfast was waiting downstairs. Eggs, toast, fruit, juice. They sat together at the table. But no one ate. Not at first. They had learned something important about food. Sometimes eating meant you owed someone. Sometimes it meant the kindness came with a price. They waited. They watched. Finally, Sable picked up a piece of toast. She broke it in half and placed one piece in front of her rabbit. Mr. Peton says thank you, she said softly. Then she ate. One by one, the others followed. Except Wren. And Emmer. Emmer stayed near the kitchen doorway, standing the way he always did, watching everyone else eat first. Waiting. Across the room, Calder leaned against the counter with a cup of black coffee. He didn't speak. He didn't move closer. He just stayed there. Present. Visible. And for the first time since the alley, Emmer noticed something strange. The man wasn't watching them like a rescuer. He was watching them like someone who understood what it meant to survive. And as their eyes met for a brief second across the kitchen, Emmer felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a very long time. Not trust. Not yet. But something close enough to be dangerous. The feeling stayed with him long after breakfast ended. Emmer didn't move from his place near the doorway until every plate was empty and every chair had pushed back. Only then did he step aside, letting the others walk past him toward the stairs. That was how he had lived for 3 years. Everyone else first. Always. The house settled into a strange quiet rhythm that day. No one told the children where to go. No one gave them rules. No one asked questions. And that, more than anything, made them uneasy. Save walked slowly through the third-floor hallway, touching the walls lightly with her fingertips, as if testing whether the place was real. She checked every door, every window, every closet. Prosper stayed close to her, his hands twisting together. "Do you think we're allowed to go downstairs?" he asked. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "So we'll go together." They moved carefully, like guests who expected to be told they didn't belong. Sable sat cross-legged near the bedroom window, holding Mr. Peton up to the light. "You see, it's a rich house," she whispered to him. "Rich houses are different. People here don't yell. I haven't heard any yelling yet." She paused, listening. "Maybe we got lucky." Downstairs, Wren stood near the edge of the living room rug, staring out at the wide glass windows that overlooked the lake. The water stretched out gray and endless, moving slowly under the cold sky. He didn't touch anything. He didn't sit. He just watched. From across the room, Calder noticed. He didn't approach him. He had learned long ago that frightened children didn't trust people who moved toward them too quickly. Safety wasn't something you explained. It was something you proved by not taking space that wasn't yours. He simply walked past, slow and steady, and left the room without a word. By afternoon, the tension inside the house hadn't disappeared, but it had shifted. The children were beginning to breathe. Prosper found a pencil and a notepad left neatly on the kitchen counter. He didn't ask who had put it there. He just carried it to the living room and sat on the floor, drawing small circles over and over, filling the page with quiet patterns. Every few minutes, he glanced up, expecting someone to tell him to stop. No one did. Sable discovered a cabinet filled with snacks. She didn't take anything. She just opened the door, stared for a long time, then closed it again. Upstairs, Emmer hadn't left the hallway. He sat on the floor outside the bedroom door, his back against the wall, listening to the sounds of the house. Footsteps. Distant voices. The hum of appliances. Tracking everything. At one point, Save came out and stood in front of him. "You should rest," she said quietly. "I am resting." "You didn't sleep." "I don't sleep much." She studied his face for a long moment. "You don't have to stand guard here," she said. Emmer looked past her, down the long hallway. "Yeah," he said softly. "I do." That evening, something small happened. But small things matter when you've lived a life where nothing was steady. Sable was sitting on the living room floor again, trying to fix Mr. Peton's loose eye with a piece of tape she had found. Her tongue stuck out slightly in concentration. "You're going to be okay," she told the rabbit. "This is just a regular checkup. Doctors fix things all the time. The tape wouldn't hold. The eye kept slipping. She frowned, her small hands working harder. Calder walked through the room on his way to his office. He slowed when he saw her, but he didn't interrupt. He kept walking. 20 minutes later, he came back. In his hand was a small white tag with a thin string attached. He set it quietly on the table beside her. Sable looked up. The tag had one word written on it in careful handwriting. Peton. She stared at it. Then she tied the tag gently around the rabbit's ear with the tape. Her face changed. It wasn't a smile. Not yet. But something inside her steadied. "He knows your name," she whispered to the rabbit. Across the room, Emmer had seen everything. And for the first time since they arrived, he looked at Calder not like a threat, but like a question. That night, the house was darker, quieter, warmer. Somewhere after midnight, soft footsteps moved down the stairs again. Safe. She walked into the kitchen and opened the refrigerator carefully, trying not to make noise. She pulled out a container of juice and began pouring it into a cup. Then she stopped. Calder was already there, sitting at the table with a folder open in front of him. She froze. "Sorry," she whispered. "I didn't know you were." "You don't have to ask," he said without looking up. "If you're hungry, you eat." She nodded slowly. But she didn't leave. She stood there, holding the cup. Finally, she spoke. "They're going to come for us, aren't they?" Calder looked up. Her voice didn't shake, but her eyes did. "The system," she continued quietly. "They don't just forget kids. Someone's going to notice we're gone." A long silence filled the kitchen. Calder closed the folder. "Yes," he said. Her fingers tightened around the cup. "Will they split us?" "No. You don't know that." He met her eyes. "No," he said again. "But I don't lose things I decide to keep." She stared at him, searching his face for something she could believe. Then she nodded once and walked back toward the stairs. But halfway up, she stopped. "Emmer won't believe you," she said. "I know. He's already thinking about leaving." That made Calder's expression change. Just slightly. Save didn't say anything else. She went upstairs. And in the hallway outside the bedroom, she found Emmer sitting exactly where he had been all evening. His back against the wall. His eyes open. Watching the door. Waiting. But now, there was something new in his face. Something heavy. Something that looked a lot like a decision he hadn't told anyone about yet. Save leaned against the wall beside him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The hallway was quiet except for the soft breathing of the younger ones inside the room. "You're thinking about running," she said gently. Emmer didn't look at her. "If I'm not here," he said after a long pause, "they won't have a reason to split you." Save's heart dropped. "They always split the problem kid," he continued. "The one who fights. The one who runs. The one with the record. You're not the problem. They see me that way." He finally turned his head toward her. His eyes looked older than 14. "If they come back for us, they'll use me to break us apart. But if I'm gone, they'll place you easier. You, Prosper, Sable, Wren. You're younger. You're easier." His voice stayed steady, but his hands were shaking. Save stepped in front of him. "We're not staying without you. You don't get to decide that." "We don't split," she said. The words hung between them, the same words he had spoken in the alley. Emmer looked away. "That was before," he said quietly. "This is different. This place, this man, he's rich. He's powerful. But people like him don't keep kids like us. Not forever." Save lowered her voice. He went after our sandwiches, emergency. Emmer frowned slightly. He wrote Mr. Peton's name, she continued. He put pencils out for Prosper. He didn't yell when I took food. He didn't even ask questions. Emmer didn't answer. He's trying, she said. And nobody ever tries. That night passed slowly. But the next morning, something changed. Calder was in his study when he heard footsteps at the door. Not the light steps of the younger children. He looked up. Emmer stood in the doorway. Arms crossed. Shoulders tight. Eyes locked on him. I need to talk to you, the boy said. Calder closed the file in front of him. Come in. Emmer stepped inside but didn't sit. The system is going to come for us, he said. Yes. They're going to try to take us back. Yes. A pause. If I leave, Emma said, they'll let the others stay. Calder didn't move. They always remove the oldest first, Emma continued. I've been written up for fights. For running. For protecting them. I'm the liability. His voice didn't break. But the words were too practiced. Too familiar. I can go, he said. I've done it before. Silence filled the room. Calder stood slowly and walked around the desk, stopping a few feet in front of him. No, he said. Emmer's jaw tightened. You don't understand. I do. If I leave, they'll be safer. No. They'll get placed together. No. They won't have a problem on their record. No. Each answer came calm, firm, final. Emmer's frustration broke through. You don't know how this works. Calder stepped closer, his voice still low. I know exactly how it works. The boy froze. Because I was the oldest too, Calder said. The words hit the room like something heavy dropping. Emmer stared at him. They split us, Calder continued. My brother. My sister. Different homes. Different cities. I never saw them again. The silence that followed felt thick. I was 14, he said. I made the same decision you're making right now. I thought if I didn't fight, if I didn't cause trouble, maybe they'd keep the younger ones together. He held Emmer's gaze. They didn't. Emmer's arms slowly loosened at his sides. I've spent my whole life building things I can control, Calder said quietly. Power, money, influence. Not because I wanted it. Because I never wanted to be that powerless again. A long pause. No one is leaving, he said. Not you. Not any of you. That's not a condition. That's the decision. Emmer's voice came out softer this time. Everyone says that. I know. The boy swallowed hard. But I don't break my word. Emmer stood there, breathing slowly, like he was trying to steady something inside himself that had started to move. I can't lose them, he whispered. You won't. The room stayed quiet. Then, for the first time since he walked in, Emmer sat down. Not fully relaxed. Not trusting. But sitting. That afternoon, small changes began to ripple through the house. Prosper asked for more juice at lunch. The words came out broken, his stutter catching on the first sound. Calder didn't react. He just slid the glass toward him. Of course. Prosper stared at the glass for a long moment before taking it, and the corner of his mouth lifted slightly. In the living room, Sable spoke to Mr. Peton in a serious voice. The tall man isn't a yeller, she explained. Yellers have a face. He doesn't have that face. Upstairs, Wren sat in a patch of sunlight near the window. Calder walked past the doorway, and behind him, very quietly, Wren made a sound. Just one note. A small hum. Calder stopped. He didn't turn around right away. Because children like Ren didn't need attention for their first sound. They needed safety. He continued walking. That evening, Save found him again in the kitchen. Ran had a blanket, she said carefully. Yellow. With stars. It was left at the last place. Calder picked up his phone. Where was the facility? She told him. He made one call. It'll be here tonight, he said. Save stared at him. You mean, you actually got it? Yes. She hesitated. Then quietly, she added, Emmer likes spacebooks. I'll handle it. And Prosper, he draws. I noticed. And Sable's nightlight needs batteries. Calder nodded. She stood there for a moment longer. Then she asked the question that had been sitting in all of them. Why are you doing this? Calder didn't answer right away. Then he said simply, because someone should have done it for me. That night, the yellow blanket arrived. When Save placed it in Ren's hands, his whole body relaxed. He curled around it like something inside him had finally come home. Save went downstairs afterward. He's holding it, she said. Calder nodded once. She stood there a moment longer. Thank you, she whispered. It was the first time any of them had said it. But outside the building, across the street, a dark sedan sat with its engine running. Inside, a man lifted a camera and took a picture of the windows. The camera clicked once, then again. Inside the car, the man lowered the lens and studied the building for a long moment before making a call. They're here, he said quietly. All of them. He listened. Yeah, looks like the rich man meant it. The line went silent for a few seconds. Then the man nodded to himself. Understood. He hung up, started the engine, and drove away. Inside the penthouse, the night remained calm, unaware that something outside had begun to move. Upstairs, the children slept closer than they had in years. Prosper lay on the floor mattress with his sketchbook open beside him, pencil still in his hand. The page was filled with circles again, but this time the circles touched each other, overlapping, forming something that almost looked like a family holding on. Sable slept curled against Save, Mr. Peton tucked safely between them, the small white name tag resting against the rabbit's ear. Ren slept wrapped tightly in his yellow blanket, his breathing slow and deep, his fingers gripping the fabric as if letting go might bring the world back the way it was. And Emmer sat in the hallway, still, guarding. But tonight, his shoulders were lower. His hands rested open on his knees instead of clenched. His eyes drifted closed once, then opened again. Not sleeping, but resting. Downstairs, Calder sat alone in his study. The city lights reflected against the dark water of the lake, stretching out like a field of quiet stars. On his desk lay 3 files. One contained legal paperwork for emergency guardianship. One contained reports from private investigators, background checks, system records, placement history. The third file had just been delivered an hour earlier. He opened it slowly. Inside were photographs. The building. The entrance. The windows. Taken from across the street. Calder stared at them without moving. After a moment, he picked up his phone. Double the security rotation, he said calmly. Starting tonight. A pause. Yes. Someone's watching. He ended the call and sat back, his expression unreadable. The decision he had made in that alley was beginning to ripple outward. And decisions like that always came with a price. The next morning, the house felt different. Not tense, but alert. 2 unfamiliar men stood near the lobby downstairs when Marin arrived. They nodded politely, professional and quiet. She didn't ask questions. She had worked for Calder long enough to understand that when security increased, something serious was happening. Upstairs, the children gathered for breakfast again. This time, The pause before eating was shorter. Sable reached for her toast without hesitation. Prosper poured his own juice. Save watched the room like always, but her shoulders weren't as tight. Ren sat with his blanket draped over his lap. Emmer remained near the doorway, but he didn't stand as far back. Calder entered the kitchen a few minutes later. No greeting. No small talk. Just presence. He poured his coffee and leaned against the counter. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Prosper cleared his throat. "See, can I, have more eggs?" The words stumbled, but they came. Calder slid the serving plate closer to him. "Take what you want." Prosper looked at him carefully, then took another scoop. A small victory. After breakfast, Save found Calder in the living room. She approached slowly, the way she always did when asking for something important. "The system called," she said. He looked at her. "How do you know?" "I heard Marin on the phone." A pause. "They want a meeting," she continued. "About custody." Calder nodded once. "I expected that." Save hesitated. "They're going to try to take us back, aren't they?" "Yes." Her fingers tightened around the edge of her sleeve. "Will we have to go?" "No." She searched his face. "You sound sure." "I am." Save swallowed. "Even if they say you can't keep all of us?" "All of you stay," he said simply. She nodded slowly. But this time, instead of walking away immediately, she stayed. "Emmer doesn't believe that yet," she said. "I know. He thinks you're going to choose the easiest option." Calder's expression didn't change. "I don't choose easy," he said. That afternoon, a man in a suit arrived. He carried a briefcase and introduced himself quietly to Calder in the study. Papers were spread across the desk. Voices stayed low, calm, professional. But the word hearing was mentioned more than once. And the word risk. Upstairs, Emmer stood outside the study door, listening. Later that evening, he walked into the room without knocking. Calder looked up. "What did they say?" Emmer asked. "They scheduled a court hearing." "When?" "Tuesday." Emmer's jaw tightened. "That's when they decide if we go back." "That's when they try," Calder corrected. Emmer stepped closer. "If they say no, if they say you can't keep us all." Calder didn't answer right away. The boy's voice dropped. "They'll split us again." The words weren't fear. They were memory. Calder stood. "They won't. You don't know that." "No," he said calmly. "But I know what I'm willing to risk." Emmer stared at him. "What does that mean?" "It means," Calder said quietly, "I'm not letting anyone take you back into a system that already failed you 11 times. The number hung in the air. 11. 11 places. 11 separations. 11 promises broken. Emmer's breathing slowed. But the fear didn't leave his eyes. Because children like him didn't trust promises. They trusted evidence. That night, the house settled into silence again. One by one, the lights went out. Save tucked the yellow blanket around Wren. Prosper placed his drawing under his pillow. Sable whispered to Mr. Peton about courtrooms and judges and staying together. Emmer returned to his place in the hallway. But after a long time, something changed. He stood, walked downstairs, and stopped at the entrance to the study. Calder was still awake, reading. Emmer stepped inside. "I'm coming with you," he said. "To the hearing." Calder looked up. A long pause. "Okay," he said. Emmer nodded once. Then he turned to leave. But at the doorway, he stopped. "If they try to take us," he said quietly, without turning around, "I'm not going back without a fight." Calder closed the file in his hands. and for the first time, his voice carried a hint of steel. "They won't be fighting you," he said. Emmer turned slightly. "Then who?" Calder met his eyes. "Me." Emmer stood there for a moment, studying Calder's face. He wasn't looking for confidence. He was looking for something stronger than that. He was looking for certainty. After a long second, Emmer gave a small nod. Not trust, not belief, but something close enough to keep him standing instead of running. He turned and went back upstairs. The days leading up to the hearing moved slowly, but something inside the house kept shifting in small, quiet ways. On Saturday morning, Prosper brought his sketchbook to the kitchen table instead of hiding it. He drew while the others ate. Lines, shapes, circles turning into figures. At one point, he slid the page slightly toward Calder without saying anything. 5 small stick figures stood together. Behind them, a tall figure. Calder looked at the drawing. He didn't comment. He didn't make a big moment out of it. He simply slid a fresh pencil toward Prosper. Prosper's hand paused. Then he picked it up. Across the table, Save watched that exchange very carefully. That afternoon, Sable followed Calder into the living room while he was reviewing papers. She stood nearby, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. Finally, she held up Mr. Peton. "He's worried," she said seriously. Calder looked up. "About Tuesday." A pause. Sable lowered her voice. "Mr. Peton says sometimes judges don't listen to kids." Calder leaned back slightly. "Sometimes they don't." Her face tightened. "But sometimes they listen to evidence," he added. She blinked. "What's evidence?" "Proof," he said. "Things that show the truth." Sable thought about that. Then she nodded firmly. "I'll tell him that." She walked away, whispering to the rabbit as if delivering important news. Later that evening, Save found Emmer sitting by the window in the bedroom. He was staring out at the lake. "You're thinking about it again," she said. "I'm thinking about what happens if it goes wrong." "It won't. You don't know that." She sat beside him. "You heard him." Emmer didn't answer. After a long silence, he spoke quietly. "If they take us back, I won't let them separate us." Save looked at him. "What does that mean?" "It means we run." Her heart dropped. "Emmer." "I'm not doing this again," he said. "Not another place. Not another split. I'd rather be on the street with you than safe somewhere alone." The words weren't dramatic. They were calm. That made them heavier. Save reached for his hand. "We're not there yet," she said softly. He didn't pull away. Downstairs, Calder was in the study again when his attorney called. The conversation was short, quiet, direct. "Yes," Calder said. A pause. "I understand the risk." Another pause. "No. We move forward." He ended the call and sat still for a long time afterward. Because the hearing wasn't just about custody. If the court decided to look deeper into his life, his business, his finances, there were things they would find. Things that had built his power. Things that didn't belong in a courtroom. And for the first time in years, Calder realized something uncomfortable. He was about to risk everything he had built. 5 children who had known him less than 2 weeks. Sunday morning brought something unexpected. Wren was sitting on the floor in the living room, wrapped in his yellow blanket, watching the light move across the carpet. Calder walked through the room without stopping. Behind him, very softly, came a sound. Not a hum this time. A word. "Stay." Calder stopped. He didn't turn immediately. He knew what that moment meant. If you looked too fast, if you reacted too quickly, you could scare the words right back into silence. Slowly, he turned. Wren was looking at him. Not through him. At him. Calder nodded once. I'm here. Wren didn't speak again. But he didn't look away. That evening, the house was quieter than usual. Everyone understood what Tuesday meant. Even Sable, who spoke to Mr. Peton in careful whispers about courtrooms and staying together. Even Prosper, who drew the same picture again, 5 figures holding hands. Even Save, who checked everyone's clothes twice and laid them out neatly for the morning. And Emmer didn't sit in the hallway that night. Instead, he walked downstairs. He found Calder in the study. I need to ask you something, he said. Calder set the papers aside. If the judge says no, if they try to send us back, will you still fight? Yes. How far? Calder held his gaze. As far as it takes. Emmer nodded slowly. Then he hesitated. What if they say you're not a good person? The question hung between them. Not cruel. Just honest. Calder didn't answer right away. Finally he said, Then I'll prove I'm good enough for you. Emmer looked at him for a long moment. Then he did something he hadn't done with any adult in years. He stepped closer and rested his shoulder briefly against Calder's arm. Just for a second. Then he stepped back, crossed his arms again, and walked out of the room. Monday morning came gray and cold. The city looked tired. The house moved quietly. Breakfast. Clothes. Shoes. Wren kept his yellow blanket folded over his arm. Sable carried Mr. Peton like a witness. Prosper held his drawing. Save stayed close to everyone. And Emmer stood near the door. Ready. When the car pulled up outside, no one spoke. They climbed in together. 5 children in the back. Calder in the front. As the car pulled away, the building faded behind them. The city moved around them. Traffic. Noise. People living their ordinary lives. But inside the car, everything felt suspended. Halfway downtown, Save leaned forward. Whatever happens, she said quietly, we don't split. Emmer nodded. We don't split. From the front seat, Calder spoke without turning. You won't. The courthouse came into view ahead. Tall, cold, official. A place where decisions were made by people who didn't know their names. The car slowed. And in the back seat, Wren tightened his grip on the yellow blanket. And whispered, almost too softly to hear. Home. The car came to a slow stop at the curb. No one moved right away. The courthouse rose above them, tall and gray, its windows reflecting a sky that looked just as cold. People walked in and out carrying files, coffee cups, worries. To them, it was just another workday. To the 5 children in the back seat, it felt like the world had come to decide their future. Emmer opened the door first. He stepped out and immediately turned, holding his hand back for Save. She took it. Prosper followed, clutching his folded drawing against his chest. Sable climbed out carefully, holding Mr. Peton like something important. Wren stepped down last, his small fingers wrapped tightly around the yellow blanket. They stood together on the sidewalk. 5 in a line. Waiting. Calder came around the front of the car and stopped beside them. Stay close, he said quietly. They walked inside together. The hallway smelled like paper and old coffee. Voices echoed. Doors opened and closed. Somewhere, a clerk called out a case number. They were led into a small courtroom. A long bench. A table for the attorneys. A raised seat for the judge. The children sat together in the back row. Emmer took the seat at the edge, his body angled slightly in front of the others, the way he always positioned himself. Calder sat at the table with his attorney. Across the room, a woman from the system shuffled through a folder. She didn't look at the children. The hearing began quietly. Words like placement, guardianship, evaluation, suitability filled the air. Numbers were mentioned. Dates. Reports. But the children didn't understand the language. They understood only one thing: stay together or not. After a while, the judge looked up. "Mr. Thane," he said, "the state's concern is stability. These children have experienced multiple placements. The question is whether your home can provide long-term structure and appropriate care." Calder stood. "Yes." The judge studied him. "You understand that if guardianship is granted, you become fully responsible. Education, medical care, emotional welfare. This is not temporary." "I understand. And if the court later determines your environment is unsuitable, the children will be removed." Calder didn't hesitate. "Then the court won't determine that." A pause. The judge looked toward the back of the room. At 5 children sitting close together. At the boy on the end who hadn't relaxed his shoulders once. "Does the oldest child wish to speak?" the judge asked. Emmer froze. Save looked at him. Prosper held his breath. Slowly, Emmer stood. He walked forward alone. His voice came out steady. "They've moved us 11 times, he said. Every place said it was temporary. Every place said they'd try to keep us together." He swallowed. "They didn't." The courtroom was silent. "This is the first place where nobody talks about separating us," he continued. "Nobody treats us like a problem to solve." He glanced back at his siblings. Then at Calder. "He didn't ask for us. He chose us." The judge leaned back slightly. "And if the court denies this petition?" he asked. Emmer's hands tightened at his sides. "Then we run," he said simply. Gasps whispered through the room. "We don't split," he added. He turned and walked back to his seat. The judge sat quietly for a long moment. Then he looked at the paperwork again. At the history. The placements. The failed reports. Then he looked at Calder. "You understand the responsibility you are requesting?" "Yes." "You understand the scrutiny that will follow?" "Yes." "And you're willing to accept that risk?" Calder didn't raise his voice. "I already have." The judge nodded slowly. He set the file down. "The court grants emergency guardianship, effective immediately, pending formal review." The sound of the gavel was soft. But to the 5 children, it sounded like something breaking open. For a moment, no one moved. Then Sable's voice came out small and trembling. "Mr. Peton says, are we staying?" Calder walked toward them. He didn't kneel. He didn't make a speech. He simply said the same words he had said in the alley. "All of you." That was the emotional peak of everything they had carried. Prosper let out a shaky breath that turned into a quiet laugh. Save covered her mouth, her shoulders shaking. Sable wrapped her arms around Calder's waist without thinking. Rand stepped forward slowly. Then he spoke, clear and steady. "Home." Emmer stood still for a moment. Then he stepped closer. Not as a guard. Not as a protector. Just as a boy. He put his hand on Calder's shoulder and held it there. The drive back felt different. The city looked warmer somehow. Back at the penthouse, the silence wasn't heavy anymore. It felt lived in. That night, the children didn't sleep in a tight cluster. Prosper spread his drawings across the floor. Sable introduced Mr. Peton to every room. Save opened the windows just a little, letting the cold air in like something new. Rand sat in the sunlight again, his yellow blanket folded beside him instead of wrapped around him. And Emmer didn't sit in the hallway. He went downstairs. He found Calder in the study. "Are you sure about this?" Emmer asked. Calder looked up. "Yes." Emmer nodded. After a moment, he sat down across from him. Not to watch. Not to guard. Just to be there. Weeks passed. The house filled with school schedules, grocery lists, drawings on the fridge, small arguments, laughter that came easier each day. The system checked in. The reports were filed. The review came back. Stable. Suitable. Permanent. One evening, Sable asked a question at dinner. "Are we rich now?" Save smiled a little. Calder answered before anyone else could. "You were never poor," he said. They looked at him. "You just didn't have someone who chose you yet." That was the truth of it. Money bought the house. Power won the hearing. But what kept them there was a decision made in a cold alley. Years later, Emmer would remember that night not as the night a rich man saved them, but as the night someone finally refused to let them be separated. Because in the end, wealth didn't change their lives. Love did. And sometimes, the strongest families aren't the ones you're born into. They're the ones someone chooses to fight for. If this story touched your heart, subscribe for more stories like this, and tell me in the comments which region you're watching from.